In this episode, we are going to have a look at the concept of auto-loading our classes. In other words, rather than having a list of require statements, one for each class that we need within our file, we are going to have a simple function which will take care of loading the necessary classes to process our code. Now, in programming environment, this sort of behavior is called auto-loading. And if we go back to our browser, navigate to php.net and search for autoloading classes, you'll see that the description says that many developers writing object-oriented applications create one PHP source file per class definition, as we did obviously with our examples. If we go back to the editor, our collection has its own file, our basket has its own file, formatter has its own file, and so on. And then it says one of the biggest annoyances is having to write a long list of needed includes at the beginning of each script, one for each class, which is what we've been doing up until now. In PHP 5, this is no longer necessary. The SPL Autoload Register function registers any number of autoloaders, enabling for classes and interfaces to be automatically loaded if they are currently not defined. By registering autoloaders, PHP is given a last chance to load the class or interface before it fails with an error. Now, what does it actually mean? That means that if we go back to the editor, did not include any of these files manually, we obviously will get the fatal error that obviously our class cannot be found. Now, the only other way for us now to be able to actually get this file is by the use of autoloader. So first of all, we're going to check whether the file has been included manually, and then fallback for this will be this autoloader. That's what we have in the autoloader. In modern applications, we don't really require files manually like this. We use the autoloader, and that's the way we're going to be working with our code from now on. Obviously, once we've discussed how autoloaders are working. So we're still requiring these files, but what I would like to do is to make sure that I have this autoloader, and every time the new class is needed within this file, I don't have to be bothered with adding another require line to my file. Okay, so if we go back to the browser, let's click on this SPL Autoload Register function, and it tells us what this function does. It registers given function as autoload implementation. And then we have description. It returns Boolean true or false. It takes callable, so it may be a closure, like the anonymous function, or it may be a method on the class, on the instance of the class. Then we have second argument, which is of a Boolean type, throw, and then we have a third one, prepend, by default set to false. Register a function with the SPL provided autoload queue. If the queue is not yet activated, it will be activated. If your code has an existing autoload function, then this function must be explicitly registered on the autoload queue. And now this autoload _ autoload is the old function. This is why we actually referring to SPL Autoload Register. You shouldn't be using this one because it's outdated and it will be deprecated in the future versions of PHP. This is because SPL Autoload Register will effectively replace the engine cache for the autoload function by either SPL Autoload or SPL Autoload call. If there must be multiple autoload functions, because you can have multiple ones, let's say part of your code has classes written a certain way, the structure of the classes the other one a different way, and you have to basically, or located in a different directories, you would have to have separate autoloaders to load them all. And you can do this. You can actually register multiple autoloaders. So if first one fails, it's going to go to the next one and try to autoload the class with the second one, and so on. It effectively creates a queue of autoload functions and runs through each of them in the order they are defined. By contrast, autoload may only be defined once. So this autoload, the old one, autoload may only be defined once, whereas this new one, SPL Autoload Register, can be defined multiple times. And then we have parameters, autoload function. The autoload function being registered. If no parameters provided, then the default implementation of SPL Autoload will be registered. We'll have a look at this in just a second. Then second argument, throw, this parameter specifies whether SPL Autoload Register function should throw exceptions when the autoload function cannot be registered. Basically, whatever we pass as first argument, if there's any problem with this, it cannot be registered, then whether we should throw exception or not. And that's why it's a Boolean true or false. And then the third flag is prepend. If true, SPL Autoload Register will prepend the autoloader to the autoload queue instead of appending it. Now, what does this mean, this autoloading queue? Autoloading queue means basically that if we have the first one, the first function, SPL Autoload Register, after this one we have another one, this is creating the queue. This is going to be executed first, the second one is going to be executed after this one, the third one is going to be executed after the second one, and so on. But with this third flag, we can set it to true, in which case this SPL Autoload Register function, regardless of which place it is actually on the list of autoloader functions, it's going to go right to the top. So it's going to be prepended rather than appended to the end of the queue. So it's going to go as the first item in the queue. So this one is going to be called first. I'm going to show you an example with this as well. And obviously the returned values, we have returns true or false on failure. Let's have a look at this SPL Autoload. Whenever we're going to be registering this SPL Autoload Register without any arguments, the default SPL Autoload will be registered. So whatever this function does by default, that's how autoloading is going to work. And this one, default, this is basically default implementation for autoload. They're referring to this autoloading using this underscore autoload, but as I said, this is the old version of autoloading. You should not use this anymore. So SPL Autoload doesn't return anything, void. It takes class name, then file extension. This function is intended to be used as a default implementation for autoload. If nothing else is specified and SPL Autoload Register is called without any parameters, then this function will be used for any later call to autoload. And then we have parameters. First one is the lowercase name of the class and namespace being instantiated. And namespaces is going to be a topic of the next video. Then file extensions. By default, it checks all include paths to contain file names built by the lowercase class name appended by the file name extension with full stop inc as an include file and .php. And it doesn't obviously return anything. So let's go back to our editor and try all this that we've just read, because obviously we can read for hours and we may not understand what we really after. So I'm going to comment all these lines. Now, the first thing I need to do is to register our autoloader. So SPL Autoload Register. By default, we don't put any arguments, at which point, if we go back to our browser, this SPL Autoload is going to be triggered. And as we read, this SPL Autoload will check basically on the include path if there are any files with the name of the class that we are trying to look for, trying to basically use, and then with the extension appended to this file, either inc or .php. Okay, so if we run this now in the browser, obviously we get this SPL Autoload class basket could not be loaded from within our file index.php on line 12. So obviously here we're failing, the default implementation is not going to work, and this isn't going to work because if I now try and echo what we have on our on our include path, get include path, and we've discussed this function in the first season of this course. So let's just echo it and then exit right after this, so nothing after this exit is going to be returned back to the browser. So refresh the page, and there we go. We have our current directory, which is the full stop, and then colon is representing path separator. So this is one path, this full stop, then second path is this part. And this one is basically pointing to the mump directory for the version 7 of PHP. So we only have two paths on the include path. Now, In order for this to work without any arguments, this SPL Autoload Register, we need to add the path to our source directory to the include path. And in order to do it, what we're going to use is the function, which was also discussed in the previous season, called set include path, and we are going to prepend the path to the source directory. So we're going straight from the file from within which we actually are adding this path. So it's going to be straight src directory, and then path separator. So concatenating this with path separator constant, which contains the path separator for a given operating system. And then we append the existing include path, so we don't lose the paths that were already there. So we could use get include path at the end. We could obviously move this source to the end and have first of all check on whatever include paths we have already on the include path, and then add to this include path this source directory, which would be the last item to check within for our classes to be autoloaded. Now if we save it, and I'm going to, before we actually register this autoload, I'm going to again echo get include path so we can see, and then exit so we can see what we have on the include path. Now if we check in the browser, and there we go, you can see our local source directory is now included, then it's separated with a path separator, then we have local directory, the directory where our index.php file is, then separator again, and then the path to the PHP. Okay, so now we have three different paths on our include path. Now if I remove this echo statement here, and now we register this autoloader, this time this autoloader, the default SPL Autoload, will check also within the source directory for any file with the basket name, and will also append the .inc and .php file extension to this name to check for the file that matches this name. And obviously it will find this basket.php, then it will look inside, and hey, there we go, there's a class basket definition. So this is the class I'm going to autoload. So if we save it now, preview everything in browser, and there we go, we get the same result as before, but this time we don't need any of this. We can remove all these items, and we have the file loaded automatically. Not only this basket, but also this array formatter, JSON formatter, string formatter, as well as any file that these files listed here require, like for instance this collection, which is the parent class of the basket, as well as the formatter, which is the interface that these formatters implement. So all these files will be automatically autoloaded. Okay, so this is one of the things. There is a slight problem with this approach, however, because if you think about this, if there is another basket class anywhere that this system might be using, perhaps the class that comes with PHP or any other extension that's installed on your computer, then we're going to have a problem, because obviously we will run into the situation with the naming collision, because one basket class is here, this is the class we need, and once the class is found, the script is not going to look for another instance of this class. So if there is one inside of the source directory and there was another basket class that we also need for this specific code in any other directory which is on the include path, then only the first one is going to be autoloaded. So obviously the other one would throw an error because it wouldn't have the methods that this one has, and actually the methods that we might be needing from this other instance. So as you can see, that works, but probably not the way we would like it to. So the next thing to do is to try and create our own autoloader, and then just figure out exactly what we actually want to achieve with our code. And to do this, we need the callback of some sort, callable method, either if it's a method on the class or just a closure, which is what we're going to use here. Closure, by closure I mean obviously the anonymous function. So we're going to start with the function. This one will take the name of the class that we're trying to look for, and I use PHP 7, so I'm going to prepend it with the string, just type hinted here. If you're on PHP lower than 7, then you won't be able to use string as scalar types, and available scalar type hinting as argument obviously is not available until the version 7 of PHP. Okay, from within this function now what I can do is to simply do something like this: require once, point to the directory that I want to search within only this directory, so source, then /, then name of the class, and then append PHP to this, and these are the only classes that I want to autoload. Now I can remove this set include path because I don't need to add to this include path anymore, and you will see that it's still working just fine. As you can see, I've just refreshed and it works just fine, but this time I have a custom autoloader. It autoloads files only from within the source directory, and then name of the file, which is going to be passed through as an argument, name of the class that I'm trying to look for. In this case, it would be, for instance, basket, and then I'm appending .php extension, which obviously would find this basket.php, which contains the definition for the basket class. So our autoloader works fine, but at some point you are asked to create a new directory. For whatever reason, you might have a separate directory where different set of classes is located. Let's create this classes directory here. So now obviously this autoloader will fail because we also need to check within the classes directory. So how can we do this? As you may remember, we can register multiple autoloaders. So let's just duplicate this entire one and set the first one to look inside of the classes. And inside of the classes, I'm going to create the class with the same name, basket.php. Only this time I'm not going to put any implementation here. It's going to be just an empty class definition. So what's going to happen now? If I now try and preview everything in a browser, refresh, and there we go. Fatal error, uncaught error, call to undefined method, basket format. And this is because we've loaded the basket from within the classes, not the one we actually wanted from within the source directory, which contains this format method, but the one which doesn't have any methods. So how can we fix this? As you may remember, we read that this Autoload Register method takes 3 arguments. Second one, after the closure, after our callback method, will indicate whether we want to throw an exception in case our callback method fails. So let's keep it as true. And then the third argument will tell us whether we want it to be prepended to the queue. Now this queue, it goes like this. The first item in the queue is this first Autoload Register. Second item in the queue is the second Autoload Register. But if we set it to true, what's going to happen? This Autoload Register, even though it's on the next line, it's going to be executed before this one because it's prepended, not appended to the queue. So if we try now, look what's going to happen. Refresh the page and everything works exactly the same way as it did before. So you can manipulate which one is going to be executed first within the queue. Now the problem with this code is that now that we prepended the second autoloader before this first one, we can load the classes from within the source directory. But if we really wanted to load this basket from within the classes, it will still fail because obviously now this first one is always going to find this basket within the source directory, and it will never get to the second one to find the other one within the classes. This is where namespacing comes into play. And namespacing is the subject of the following video, and we will follow a little bit further with autoloading when we learn how to use the composer and autoload not only our own code, but also packages that someone else might have written and we simply want to make use of them.